Welcome to the deep dive, where we take these huge foundational texts, pull them apart, and really give you the shortcut to getting what's going on.
And today we are jumping into a really critical transition, Genesis chapters 10 and 11. If you think of the whole story as a road trip, this is that key bridge connecting Noah's world to Abraham's.
Exactly. It's the end of what people often call prehistory. And you've got two huge narratives here. First, the Table of Nations in chapter 10.
Which is all about where everyone went.
And then, of course, the Tower of Babel in chapter 11, which explains why they all got scattered in the first place.
And you really have to read them together. Chapter 10 is, at its core, this massive genealogy of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But it's not just a dry list. The author keeps inserting these really important little stories, these interruptions.
When's the story of Nimrod?
Exactly. And those interruptions set up everything that's about to happen. By the end of chapter 11, you get this major turning point, right before the whole narrative pivots to Abraham in chapter 12.
So we're basically exploring how the world got divided by language, by geography, and what that split really means for us, especially when you think about unity. Is it for our own glory or for something bigger?
Let's start with that Table of Nations in chapter 10.
Okay, so where do we begin?
Well, the first thing, and all the source commentary is really clear on this, is that this is the Table of Nations. It is not the Table of Races.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. The text makes absolutely no attempt to connect these groups to our modern ideas of race. The focus is completely on language, clan, family groups, and nationality.
Right, so it's like just because your last name is Flanagan, it doesn't mean you're 100% Irish or that's your nation now. We're talking about clans, maybe like Native American tribes or nations.
That's a perfect analogy. And this whole census lists 70 names. That number, 70, is not an accident. It's symbolic. It gets contrasted later with the 70 members of Jacob's family who go into Egypt. So 70 here represents the totality, the fullness of all the Gentile nations. The Hebrew word is goyim, which can mean both nations and Gentiles.
So it's a map of the entire known world, but a map that's designed to funnel you down to one specific family. Let's walk through the three sons, starting with Japheth.
Okay, so Japheth's descendants are listed first. They're often called the coastland peoples or maritime peoples. They just spread out far and wide.
Asia Minor, the Greek islands.
Exactly, the Russian steppes. In the grand biblical story, they're kind of the people around the main conflict, which is going to unfold in the Middle East.
And you get these really curious names in the list, like Ashkenaz.
Yeah, which is fascinating because later that name comes to mean European Jews, even though Jewish people are Semitic, from the line of Shem.
And what about Tarshish? That one always comes up.
Tarshish is a puzzle for scholars. It's where Jonah tried to run to. So it's, the farthest edge of the world. Some people think the name is connected to the word for tin, which leads to theories about, say, Britain or Spain.
So they're the peripheral nations. What about Ham?
Ham's descendants stay right in the middle of it all. Egypt, Northern Africa, Mesopotamia, Syro-Palestine.
So Mitzrayim is Egypt.
Yes, it's the dual form for Upper and Lower Egypt. The main political and military conflict throughout the Bible is very often between the line of Ham and the covenant line of Shem.
Which brings us to Shem. He's listed last, which feels intentional.
It's very intentional. It's because the whole narrative is funneling down to him. The author puts up this huge flair for the reader when he calls Shem the father of all the children of Eber.
That's the clue, isn't it?
It's the big one. It's basically saying, pay attention. This is the line to follow. Because the word Hebrew is linguistically connected to the name Eber. So the whole chapter is a world map designed to point you right to Abraham.
Okay, but this is where the author breaks his own pattern. The list of Ham's descendants just stops, and we get this little biography of one person, Nimrod. Why? Why interrupt the flow for him?
It's so unusual for an ancient genealogy. But Nimrod is, well, he's monumental. The text says he was the first on earth to be a mighty man, a mighty hunter. He founded the first kingdom in Shinar, Babel, Erech, Akkad, and then went on to build Nineveh.
He's the father of the centralized military city-state.
Exactly. And there's this defiance that's just baked into the language used to describe him. He's a mighty hunter before the Lord.
What does that before mean?
Well, the Hebrew word is lifnai. It can just mean in the sight of, but it literally means in the face of. And many conservative commentators argue it means he was hunting in opposition to God.
So, like, in defiance of God.
Precisely. And his name, Nimrod, even points to that. It's related to a word that means we will revolt.
So he becomes this archetype,
Yep.
the founder of the anti-kingdom.
He really does. In many traditions, he's seen as the one who started idolatry, the first world dictator. He's sort of a shadow or a type of that final world ruler figure, the Antichrist.
Because he creates the template for global defiance.
And the city he founded, Babylon, becomes the ultimate symbol of opposition to God all the way through the Bible, from Isaiah to Revelation.
But hold on, is that connection to the Antichrist actually in the text? Or is that something later theologians read back into it?
That's a fair question. No, a text doesn't call him the Antichrist. The power of the story is in its simplicity. He's the first ruler to build an empire on his own might and for his own glory, directly contradicting God's command to scatter.
He's the template.
He's the template, and the author sees him as so significant, so villainous, that he's willing to break the sacred genealogy just to tell you about him.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the collective rebellion we see in chapter 11 at the Tower of Babel.
It does. So the scene opens, the whole earth has one language, and they all migrate and settle in one place, the plain of Shinar.
Which is Sumer, basically.
Right, the lower Tigris-Euphrates basin. So they have everything they need to succeed. Total unity, one language, and a fertile place to live.
And in that area, there's no natural stone, so they have to innovate. They use brick for stone and bitumen, tar for mortar. And they start building a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens.
And that structure, given the location and the materials, it's almost certainly a ziggurat, one of those Mesopotamian step pyramids.
And understanding that it's a ziggurat is crucial, isn't it? It changes the whole meaning.
It changes everything. We tend to picture them building a skyscraper to physically climb into heaven. But that's not what a ziggurat was for.
Right. It was an artificial mountain.
It was sacred space. It wasn't for people to go up. It was designed as a kind of executive elevator for the god to come down and receive worship in the temple next to it.
Wow. So the rebellion isn't a physical challenge. It's a theological one. They're not trying to reach God's house.
They're trying to build a house for God on their terms, in their city, to control his presence. It's not about defying gravity. It's about defying God's sovereignty.
So what were the specific acts of rebellion that triggered God's response?
There are two, and they were really fundamental. The first is just blatant disobedience. God's command to Noah's family was crystal clear. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth.
And they do the exact opposite.
The exact opposite. They settle in one place and build a city for the explicit purpose of not being scattered. They chose comfort over command.
And the second reason?
It cuts right to the heart of their motivation. Pure pride, self-glory. Their stated goal right there in the text is, let us make a name for ourselves.
They're building this sacred space not to honor God's name, but to make their own name famous.
It's the ultimate act of human autonomy, the belief that they can achieve security and greatness all on their own with their unity and their technology. It's the illusion of the self-made man, just on a global scale.
And God's response is so interesting. It says he came down to see.
Which is such a powerful image. This tower that seems so massive to them was so tiny from a divine perspective that God had to come down just to inspect it. But he saw the danger.
Right. He says that with one language and one purpose, nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them.
And that's a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
Unified human potential aimed entirely at self-glorification is, well, it's inherently destructive. So the judgment had to break that unity.
By confusing their language.
Exactly. God confuses their language. The verb is balal, which is a play on the name of the city, Babel, meaning confusion. That one act forces them to scatter. It fulfills God's original command, but as a judgment, not as a blessing.
So that scattering, that explains the origin of all the world's languages. How does that idea hold up, biblically speaking?
Well, the story suggests that instead of one language slowly evolving into many, you have a sudden explosion of maybe, fewer than 100 original language families.
Like Proto-Indo-European or Sino-Tibetan.
Exactly. Those families pop into existence all at once. And then over thousands of years, they evolve and change into the variety we have today.
So is there any secular linguistic theory that aligns with that?
Well, the interesting thing is that secular theories really struggle to connect these major, distinct language families back to a single common ancestor. Babel actually provides a mechanism for why they appear so distinct from the very beginning.
Okay, so that's language. But the separation also had a huge impact on the human gene pool, right? This is where we get to the origins of different physical appearances, what people call race.
Yes, the dispersion created genetic isolation in small groups, which is what produced the different ethnicities you see. And it's really important to be clear on the science here. There is only one pigment in human skin, Just one.
Melanin.
Melanin, so what we call different colors, are just different shades, different amounts of that one pigment. All of that genetic potential was present in the first humans.
They were likely olive-skinned, carrying the genes for both high and low melanin production.
That's right. So when they scattered, that isolation meant certain traits became dominant. If you moved to a sun-drenched area like equatorial Africa, high melanin was a huge advantage.
And if you moved to less sunny northern Europe, you needed less melanin to produce enough vitamin D.
Precisely. And in small, isolated groups, those traits can become fixed very, very quickly. But the profound point is that there is only one human race. We are all one blood.
Which brings us to the huge pivot at the end of chapter 11. We go from this story of collective human failure, the self-made man at Babel, to God focusing on one person, Abram, the God-made man.
It's the ultimate contrast. At Babel, the cry is, we will make a name for ourselves, and the result is confusion. To Abram, God says, I will make your name great, and the result is blessing. The whole focus shifts from human works to divine promise.
And the tension is there from the very beginning. Abram has to leave this major city, Ur of the Chaldeans, a center of technology and power,
A city that Nimrod's legacy helped build.
for a land he's never seen. But then the text drops this huge problem into the story.
It really does. It tells you right away that his wife, Sarai, was barren. God is promising to make a great nation from him. But the hero's line is apparently a dead end before it even starts.
It requires a miracle from day one.
And it's also interesting that on their way to Canaan, they stop and settle for a while in a place called Haran.
That's where his brother died.
Yes, and that stop is deeply symbolic. God told them to go to the land, he would show them, but they paused. They settled. The sources often see this as a kind of spiritual slowdown, sort of halfway obedience.
Settling for comfort instead of pushing on to the full promise.
It shows that human failure isn't just about big, prideful towers. It can also be about quiet, comfortable stagnation.
But the real answer to the failure of Babel, the grand reversal, comes much later in the New Testament.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
Babel is all about human pride, the confusion of language, and a scattering of judgment. Then Pentecost in Acts chapter 2 is its perfect reversal.
At Babel, one language becomes many, causing confusion.
At Pentecost, people speaking many different languages all hear and understand one single message in their own tongue, the mighty works of God.
And the result is unity centered on God. And then a scattering, but this time it's to spread the gospel, to spread blessing, not as a judgment.
It is the divine solution to the problem that Genesis 11 lays out so clearly.
So when you put it all together, what does this mean for you today? It seems these chapters are telling us that any human project, no matter how unified, if it's aimed at our own glory, it's just destined to end in division and confusion. Babylon becomes the symbol of trying to get to heaven on our own steam.
It really does. The story forces us to look at our own ambitions. The unity we're trying to build in our companies, in our communities, even in our families, is it centered on making a name for ourselves? Or is it centered on a greater purpose that comes from outside of us?
A profound question, and here's a final thought for you to take away, building on that moment in Abram's journey. If Babel is about settling for less in Shinar, and Abram himself temporarily settled for comfort in Haran, what's the Haran in your own life? Where have comfort and familiarity stopped you from moving toward a greater, maybe even a God-directed calling?